Yeah, I'm going to read the binder. It's going to be great. Mm-hmm. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. In 1976, 13 visionary women came together to form CMC to connect people and ideas through community conversation. 47 years later, that conversation is still going strong. CMC explores public policy issues, current events, and spotlights lessons in leadership at forums just like this one every week. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Ellen Block, a director at Vertiv. I'm also proud to serve as a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. For those of you joining us by live stream, we're coming to you today from our beautiful new home in Columbus's historic Italian village, the Ellis. Welcome to all of you. Let's begin by welcoming our newest CMC members. Mark Dilley with Mad Scientist Associates, Abe Jacob with Kallner and Associates, Isaac Miller with Evolution Financial Group, Anita Smith with Diversified Recruiting, and Laverne Price with Homeport. Welcome to CMC. If you're not already a CMC, if you're not already a CMC member, well, you and I need to work on that. Membership to CMC is open to everyone. By becoming a CMC member, you're playing a key role supporting civil discourse in Central Ohio. And it's so easy to become a CMC member. Just visit columbusmetroclub.org to join. Please do speak to a member of the CMC's staff while you're here today about joining. They'll be happy to help you become CMC's newest member. If you scan the QR codes on your tables, you will see the many generous organizations that support your not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. We could not exist without their support. Speaking of supporters, thank you to today's forum sponsor, G2G Consulting, and thank you to today's forum partners, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus and the Columbus Dispatch. Thank you once again to our gracious host, the Ellis, for its generous support. We are also grateful to the Center of Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting our live stream being carried right now on CMC's social media platforms. Let's thank everyone supporting today's forum. Now there's a And now for today's forum, unpacking the 2023 election. Every US election now feels like a litmus test for the health and future of American democracy, and this year was no exception. Yesterday, Ohioans took to the polls by the millions to decide key issues, including an amendment to the Ohio Constitution to enshrine reproductive rights and a statute to legalize recreational marijuana for adults. Columbus voters also elected new city council members, a new mayor, and weighed in on funding levies for Columbus City schools and the Columbus Metropolitan Library. Today, we dive into the 2023 election and check in on the health of the American democracy. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished panelists. Haley BeMiller, political reporter for the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. Meredith Freedhoff, chairman of the Franklin County Republican Party, with her very own fan club. Wendy Smooth, are you ready for this title? This is amazing. Ph.D. professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and senior vice provost for inclusive excellence at The Ohio State University. And Doug tells me she holds a Ph.D. in political science. Amazing. We also have Julie Womack, head of organizing for Red Wine and Blue. And our host, returning to CMC, Julie Carr Smyth, government and politics reporter for the Associated Press. You can read about all of today's panelists and their biographies by scanning the QR codes on your table. Julie, welcome back to CMC, and we look forward to today's conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Shoo, 2023. Congrats for making it through. Ohio, that was one heck of a year. So let's just dive right into this, guys. Haley, you and your team have covered issue 1 and 2 extensively. Maybe just sort of lay the groundwork of what was at stake yesterday?
So Ohio was the only state in the nation voting directly on abortion rights yesterday, and Ohioans sent the message that they wanted that right to be in the state constitution along with other reproductive rights, access to birth control, miscarriage care, that kind of thing. So really nationally watched, really high stakes, and could inform how a lot of us think about 2024 going forward, which I'm sure we will get into in a minute. And then issue 2 flew a little bit under the radar compared to issue 1, but as Julie said, that will legalize recreational marijuana in Ohio. That would make Ohio the 24th state to do so. Neighboring Michigan has had a program in place for a while that Ohioans have occasionally taken advantage of, I think. So a lot of big changes coming through that, but also more changes to come potentially based on how the legislature responds to it.
Thanks. Columbus also had some big races last night. Voters reelected Democratic Mayor Andy Ginther to a third term, and the city's new residential district system seems to have returned 6 incumbents to the city council. Who wants to speak to maybe what that has to say about how Columbusites feel about their city government?
Well, as a local Columbus resident area person, I'd say that it shows that this administration has been responsive to citizens, and citizens are responding back. So one of the things that we see with both the Ginther administration and the Columbus City Council is there have been a lot of overtures to be an extraordinarily inclusive space for listening back to residents. And I think residents are responding back. Now, residents aren't always happy with the mayor or with the city council, but the ability to have the open dialogue, I think, is appreciated among residents.
Meredith, would you like to?
I would like to add that I was disappointed in the city council election. We had 2 fantastic candidates. One is here today, Farhan Jetty. He is a unaffiliated independent candidate. And then Louis Gill, who is also someone that's been running a couple times, really wanting to serve. So I would have liked to have a little bit of a different voice to include. I don't think any good answer or good problem solving comes from only one voice at the table. So I was disappointed for them. They were great candidates. So thank you for running, Farhan.
Yeah. So Columbus City Schools scored a big victory last night with approval of their tax levy to fund district operations, building improvements, and maintenance. That was despite some notable opposition from the NAACP and others. What are the takeaways there for parents and for the schools themselves?
I think going forward, the school district is, at least in theory, going to be able to fund some of the things that they said they were going to use this money for. They talked about using it to retain staff that they hired with federal COVID dollars. There's a lot of building maintenance that needs to be done. Some of those buildings are really not in great shape, and that came to light during the teachers' strike. It was really controversial because Ohioans' property taxes across the state home values are rising, property taxes are set to go up, and groups like the NAACP said that this was going to hurt residents, hurt seniors in particular, who just can't afford those increased tax rates. So I think it's going to be important for the school district to really show that they're using this money and using it in a smart way to improve performance and improve the overall environment for students.
Julie, your organization has been watching some broader trends with regard to public schools. Maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we are definitely seeing across the country, these, I would say, attacks at the school board level. We're seeing book banning occurring. We're seeing attempts to remove race from education. We are seeing policies that are harmful to LGBTQ plus students. And I think the election actually last night speaks volumes to the pushback to this extremism. I know not only have we seen, people coming to school boards and trying to, cause chaos at that local level, that's bleeding into also library boards and attacks on public libraries, trying to remove literature and then trying to defund these libraries. And I haven't looked at all the results, but from what I've seen so far in Ohio last night, school boards pushed back. The voters pushed back on that extremism. They wanted to see those common sense candidates at their school board level.
And the Columbus Metropolitan Library did have its first levy in 13 years, which also was approved. Any surprises there or observations?
Pure joyfulness. Our libraries here in Central Columbus are just the gem of our community. So that is the space that I think unites us all in terms of our affection for our libraries. And so I was just quite joyful last evening that we were, as a community, supportive of our libraries.
Okay, now let's dig into issue 1. Last night's results continue a winning streak for pro-abortion rights groups in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned last summer at the U.S. Supreme Court. Beyond that, abortion rights proved to be a winning issue in the Kentucky governor's race, in a Pennsylvania Supreme Court race, and in the Virginia legislature. Wendy, tell us more about how Ohio fits into that national picture.
So sure, as you alluded to in the question, we are following a trend in which abortion supporters would consider themselves running the table when it comes to ballot initiatives. And we really have to think a bit more broadly about what this means for the ways in which Americans have responded to the reversal of Roe v. Wade. There's concern, and I think that these ballot initiatives show that Americans, by and large, are supportive of some levels of choice. And we can get into various conversations about the ways in which we see differences that break out by various groups. But what we're seeing is resoundingly people are supportive of a woman's right to choose, and felt that the Supreme Court has gone too far and that we really needed as states to be able to have the conversations in our states. It was very interesting, I would say, and hopefully we can have some dialogue here about it as we're thinking about what happens for 2024. As the question also alludes to, this is repercussions in this when we look across the nation, and what we're seeing for the ways in which citizens are voting in the State House, in Virginia, Governor's Mansion, in Kentucky. We're also seeing an emphasis on state Supreme Court races. And so this question of a woman's right to choose and reproductive health in the hands of women is driving a number of different levels of races. And so we have to ask ourselves a question of why that is the case. And I want to get everyone in the conversation, but love to pick up on this space of thinking about the relationship between gerrymandering and what is happening in state houses, so that we can have a real conversation about how voters are able to use their voice and when they will use their voices differently in the face of structures that prohibit full participation and voice.
Does anyone want to speak to the gerrymandering issue, or? Yeah.
Well, I was going to touch on issue 1 still. What Julie alluded to is that, Ohio joined a club last night. We were the 7th state to vote to support abortion rights after the fall of Roe versus Wade. So I'm very glad we joined that club. But what I think it speaks to is a bigger issue. This is not just about abortion or about reproductive rights. This is actually about democracy and freedom. And what we are seeing is that is not a partisan issue. All right. It's a consensus issue. We all want freedom. We all want democracy. And I think that is why you're seeing in Ohio last night and in those other 7 states, people standing up and the voters saying, no, we want to support our democracy and our freedom. In Ohio, for example, 18 counties that supported Trump in 2020 voted yes on issue 1 last night. So like I said, this is a across the board bipartisan issue. And I think it will have a big impact when it comes to talking about gerrymandering. I know people are not only wanting to protect their rights, I know from myself, I have 2 daughters. I want to make sure they have the same rights that I had. But we have seen so many women in our organization who had never once gotten involved in politics, and then they found out that they could sign a petition to get abortion on the ballot. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, I can do more than just sign this. I could actually maybe pass this around. And then the next thing we know, we have these women who are running hubs out of their home for us to get petitions distributed. It's waking a lot of people up to the rights that we could lose and the freedoms that we could lose. So I was very heartened by what I think was people standing up for freedom and democracy yesterday.
Okay, and Meredith, we saw a host of different messages on the no side, and last night we heard a lot of sorrow, disappointment from that side, as well as some defiance. But the messages ran from, this was about parental rights, this was about gender-related surgeries, late-term abortions. There was even one that tried to appeal to voters by saying both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are against late-term abortions, 2 of the most unpopular politicians in the United States. So I don't know that that worked. But we also saw the DeWines come out in an ad that I think was effective with some. I'm just wondering if you think, which of those messaging strategies do you think resonated with opponents and what we might see carry through in 2024?
I think that, the victories and losses have consequences. And to learn from a victory and learn from a loss is important. And right now, obviously, I'm disappointed about what happened with that. Last night, I supported voting no on issue 1 for several reasons. And the most important thing I think now is the issue 1, yes, voters assured us that they are not going to promote late-term abortions, which 89% of Ohioans are against, and they are not going to go after parental rights, to have the authority to give consent to your child for medical procedures when they're underage. So I think that with that victory comes the accountability that we hold them to, that we're seeing what's happening in Michigan right now. Governor Whitmer is trying to repeal late-term abortions from their constitution and she's saying that's to ban partial birth abortions is unconstitutional. And that Michigan assured those folks that they were not going to do that. And as Ohioans, I want to do better. I want to make sure that the promises that were made to the yes voters are kept. And lastly, it would be my goal for us to focus on some positive things in this. I wish that no woman ever felt that her life would get better by aborting her child. I wish that every woman could take care of their child. I wish that, and I understand bodily autonomy, I understand everything else that goes with that. But in this day and age and of course I support contraception, and of course I support miscarriage care. I support all of that. All of us do. But I would like to see, and we're not, we talk a lot about rape and incest. That's another exception that's very important to people. Why in a society are we still dealing with rape and incest? And what are we doing about that anger against women, that hatred against women, and the mental illness that causes that? I would like to see our legislature focus on some solutions to these problems that making women victims.
Thanks. So both sides accuse the other of peddling misinformation throughout this campaign. SBA Pro-Life America accused their rivals of running a campaign of fear with support from a left-wing media machine that acted as Planned Parenthood's PR department. During a briefing this morning, anti-abortion groups said the opposition ran a campaign of deception supported by Ohio's Republican establishment. Let's try to pull that apart. Haley, do you think Ohio voters were deceived, or is there something going on here?
I think people are always distorting the truth during campaigns, and this certainly was no exception. Abortion, it's a really complicated, nuanced issue, and we saw, you mentioned some of the arguments about parental rights and things like that. I think a lot of comments that were made during the campaign lacked context. For instance, the amendment does allow abortions after viability if the health or life of the mother is at risk, but the context to that is that late-term abortions are extremely rare, and they tend to happen because of a medical emergency, things like that. That doesn't mean they never happen. So I think having a more robust discussion that reflected a lot of the nuances of this issue would have been a benefit to all Ohio voters on both sides of this. And that's hard to do in a 30-second campaign ad. And we all know that Ohio law essentially lets any campaign on any side of an issue essentially lie on the airwaves if they want to, and they can get away with it. So.
And I guess I would have to disagree that we were a PR machine for anybody. Ohio abortion statistics showed 0 abortions past 25 weeks in the last 4 years, only 4 in the last decade. And partial birth abortion is outlawed at the federal level. So those were some of the fact checks that I was reporting on, and they were very detailed and difficult stories to write because there are a lot of legal nuances here. And so I think we tried our best to inform people as we went through. So cheers to journalists. There you go. Some 24 abortion restrictions have been passed in Ohio in recent years, from the ban on most abortions after the fetal cardiac activity, the 24-hour notification requirement, bans on D&E procedures, and abortions in the event of Down syndrome diagnoses. What do we know about where the legal fights on those will go next?
Well, just in general, we're going to see a lot of lawsuits over the next year or so, because what's going to happen now is abortion rights advocates are going to have to take the laws on Ohio's books that restrict abortion and put them before a court and let the court interpret how they apply under the new constitutional amendment. That's where we're going to see parental rights likely come up if if abortion rights advocates do choose to take the parental rights law to court, a judge and possibly the Ohio Supreme Court's ultimately going to decide if children are allowed broad rights under this amendment. But there are going to be other things like the 6-week ban, which is already before the Ohio Supreme Court. So it's possible that's likely going to be one of the first things that's decided. The Ohio Supreme Court has more or less been waiting for this election to take action on that case.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to issue 2. The proposed law, which passed handily yesterday, calls for allowing Ohioans age 21 and older to possess 2.5 ounces of cannabis in any form except extract and 15 grams of extract. They could also grow up to 6 plants individually and no more than 12 in a household. We heard last night from legislative leaders who are Republicans that they will revisit that law. It is an initiated statute, not a constitutional amendment. And so both the House Speaker, Jason Stevens, and the Senate President, Matt Huffman, have said there are things they would like to revisit with that before it becomes law, including the taxation provisions, maybe the THC levels and limits that are in it. I wanted to go to Julie and just ask, do you think Republicans run the risk of acting too boldly given the outcomes they saw from voters in August and yesterday?
Like I said earlier, I think the voters rejected extremism. Unfortunately, there was a lot of disinformation, and a lot of it was coming from the government itself. And I think that voters saw that. We saw voters doing their research. We saw, what people were out there making on Google and searching, reading news articles, trying to get information, coming to websites like ours, to get that information. I think they were informed. And in terms of protecting their freedom, what they saw was that the government was the source of a lot of this disinformation. And, that just spoke volumes to the fact that they want to make sure that they're the ones in charge of protecting their freedoms. So I think there will be a continuation, from the Republican side of some of these extremist tactics. I don't think that that's going to stop. We have seen, passing a 6-week abortion ban. We have seen other things in the state of Ohio that the constituents last night showed that they were not in support of. So I don't think that is going to stop. But the voters, I do trust, and I do think that they are standing up and saying no to that is not what they want to see.
Let's get back. Go ahead, Meredith.
To what you asked about issue 2. I have a personal feeling about that because I lost my first marriage to drug addiction, which started with marijuana and escalated. He's been clean now for about 13 years, and I'm so proud of that. And I'm remarried, and we're friends with him, and he's back in our life, and everything's turned out really well. So I do see it as a gateway drug for people who have a propensity to be addicted personalities. And I also think that we are going to have to watch other states now. We know from AAA that accidents have gone up 300% in the states that have approved recreational marijuana. And we also know that businesses have been affected. It affects their workforce. They have to do a lot of testing for exposure to marijuana, and a lot of people leave their jobs. The other thing is, the officers are going to have a harder time with people driving. It's all things that we can't even imagine yet are going to be affecting us. So I hope that we find a way to manage those. Also, for anybody that wants to go out and do recreational pot, it's not your grandfather's pot. It's THC used to be 3%. My dad's a 70s hippie, so I know, I lived it. And now the THC levels are 35%. So that's a big difference. So I do hope we come to some kind of agreement about limits there. I think it could be detrimental, especially to younger adults.
Wendy, let's get back to your question on redistricting here. Is there a way, even if Ohio voters wanted to hold the Republicans accountable if they don't honor yesterday's results?
Well, it sure is very difficult based on the ways in which we've structured our electoral processes. But there is quite a lot of interest in moving the ways in which we draw districts to the hands of everyday citizens to understand the percentages and the ways in which maps can be drawn in such a way that all Ohioans have the opportunity to have their voices show up in the electoral process. And I think when we look at issues like issue 1 or issue 2 and what will follow in terms of the litigation that we've talked about, or some of the ways in which parties are informing or using statistics in various ways, is that this actually contributes to greater mobilization of the Ohio electorate, which is an exciting thing that people are paying attention, as you alluded to. But that paying attention also has to mean thinking about the very structures and the accessibility of governance for all Ohioans. And we've got to really pay attention to that piece. So I think whatever happens in terms of the ways in which the legislature moves in relationship to issue 2 has the possibilities of growing greater activity around the interest in citizen-led initiatives to redraw electoral maps.
I was just going to add to that. I actually think in terms of a gerrymandering and addressing that and a citizen-led initiative, I think I'm really, what's the word I'm looking for? I think the voters are going to be very, very interested, and I think they're going to be very involved. I think yesterday, issue 2 showed us was that, like I said, the voters voted for freedom and democracy. This is top of mind for them. And I think a lot of people actually got a good civics lesson out of issue 1. I don't know about you, but as a woman, I'm in multiple group chats, and I cannot tell you how many group chats I had about ballot board and what is a ballot board. Like, people know what that is now. The other thing would be just a lot of people did not understand what their state legislature does, how much they actually control. And by looking into issue 1, they were finding out, wait, we passed a 6-week ban on what is going on in my state. It woke a lot of people up. And I think they are now very aware that democracy is fragile in Ohio, and that I think it is going to be a very motivating factor for people to get involved. I know the women in our organization will definitely be interested. And even in my friend circles, I'm hearing those conversations already.
And I can add that no one likes redistricting. I'm in Franklin County, so I don't like it. They don't draw it very well for me. I have districts that I have to fight for constantly, and I know our speaker and the minority leader worked very well together on this last map. So I was very impressed that they were able to do that. Wasn't impressed for me. So, everybody has their beef with it. Nobody likes it. I want better districts for me too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Okay. Let's turn to 2024, the coming presidential election. For better or worse, November 5th, 2024 is less than a year away now. So I'm curious what you all think yesterday's results foretell about some areas beyond abortion. Maybe starting with Meredith, how might the Republican U.S. Senate candidates be impacted by yesterday's results?
I hope we get more engaged in the problems that are what you would call a kitchen table issue, the economy, crime, education. We have such bigger fish to fry, I feel like, right now in our communities. If a third grader isn't reading, they have just as much chance of not graduating high school as they do being incarcerated for a year. That's egregious to me. At a third grade level, that their life would be decided. Terrible. Everyone's struggling with the economy. I saw a meme the other day that said, I don't want to party like it's 1999. I want to go to the grocery store and the gas station like it's 1999. People are really suffering. We brought up property taxes. People are moving out of good schools and good communities all the time because they just can't afford it. So I hope that's how we restructure what we're fighting about, what we're thinking about, and looking at candidates to understand how really we can make everybody's life better, from education to the economy and safety. We have a big safety issue right now in Columbus. This isn't the Columbus I grew up in. And how are we going to solve that? Those are the issues I'd like to see come around in 2024.
Okay. So we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now, which is in the back there. If you're watching online, please type your questions in the chat. Before we do that, I do have one final question I wanted to ask. I guess I'm going to pitch this one to Haley. What do you think yesterday and this year, 2023, said about the political dynamic in Ohio? We have heard for the last couple cycles, Donald Trump won this state with wide, impressive margins. Are we still no longer a bellwether state, or is our bell swinging back, or what's happening?
It's been a weird year. I think if you look at yesterday's election in August, the thing that these elections had in common is that Ohioans on both sides of the aisle saw what they perceived as efforts to restrict their choice, restrict their freedom, restrict their ability to sort of participate in democracy. And they did not like that. In August, they rejected the proposed amendment to make it harder to amend the Constitution. That had support from Republicans and Democrats. Issue 1 and issue 2 yesterday had support from Republicans and Democrats. But I think you can't take this year's elections and look ahead to 2024 and say Joe Biden, Sherrod Brown are going to have a super easy year. This is still a challenging state for Democrats, and I think for whatever reason, policies that are pushed by the Democratic Party in Ohio tend to be more successful than the candidates themselves. So it's still going to be a tough year for those guys for sure.
Go ahead.
If I could, so I wanted to go back to the previous question about where we see things moving. I think it's going to be really interesting for us to hear how Republicans will move around this issue nationally in terms of the returns around issue 1. What we started to hear at the tail end of the campaign, I think, is very insightful in terms of what we will hear in a national conversation. I'm really curious on what the debate stage is going to look like tonight in terms of when this issue arises. Because if you all recall, in the last few days of the campaign, Governor DeWine started to talk about ways in which you could express a more moderate approach to the issues surrounding issue 1. And I think that's going to be something that Republicans take up nationally, is a kind of yes, but, yes, and, or a no, but, no, and, which no, and, I know. Yeah, but we'll hear that, I think. And I do believe that Republicans will want to move further and further away from this issue of a woman's right to choose, because it hasn't been an issue that the American public sides very well with them. And so we will hear more issues around focusing on the economy, focusing on crime, as opposed to these issues that mobilize voters who really turn out, which we see that with women voters. And the ways in which women voters get mobilized around these types of issues. So I think there's some complexities that we want to think about as we're going into 2024. And what we're hearing in Ohio allows us to pick up on some of the nuances that we'll hear nationally.
Yes, and I mean, that would be a real sea change. I mean, abortion was the original wedge issue. It was invented as a wedge issue, and it turns out it's not too wedgy. It's most of the Americans are siding with a particular position in both red and blue states. So thank you all so much. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. From those of you with us in person, please join Doug over by the microphone. And out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get as many as possible. Please also keep in mind questions end with a question mark. Doug, what's our first question?
Julie, thank you very much. And thank you to today's panelists for being a part of a great conversation. Carol McGuire asks, what do the results by county in Ohio from issues 1 and 2 tell us about the divide between urban and rural voters in Ohio and their priorities?
I guess I could try that one.
I think we saw less of a divide countywide and more of a divide by, and literally these numbers were just coming in late last night, so I haven't had a chance to unpack them thoroughly. But I think we see a divide based on the person, even more so this time than just the district that they're in or the county that they're in.
Right, and I think that the rural areas are still more conservative, but on both these issues, certainly not divided evenly, and some people were dividing between 1 and 2 themselves, as Meredith said.
Thank you for this panel. I'm Emily Schreiber from the Matriots. It's great to see a group of women up there talking about Ohio's politics. It makes my heart sing. So thank you for being here. My question has to do with something we talked about really early on in the conversation this morning. You mentioned that there was misinformation potentially, or at least lacking context coming from both the government side and potentially some of the proponent sides on the ballot initiative. I work with a lot of women candidates, and they're wondering, how do we restore trust in government when we're seeing our government not necessarily being all that trustworthy, at least vocally, to the people of Ohio? So how can I help instruct these candidates on learning and giving more trustworthy governmental space?
Well, as a journalist, I always tell people, be honest, tell the truth, tell someone, I can't comment because I don't know. I can't comment because I haven't formed my opinion yet. Be honest about who you are, and then be authentic to the beliefs that you express. If you change your mind, say you've changed your mind. I mean, we just need, this used to happen a lot in politics, and in my 20 or 30 years doing this, it's really migrated away from people being sincere about their own personal struggle with their belief system. So that's just my
I
2
appreciate
cents.
your question too, because I manage a lot of candidates, and I look for morals, value, character, conviction. So really good things. Do they feel confident enough about what they believe in that they can face attacks? Because people can be very mean when you become a candidate, and they can't take that personally. It's the way the culture is right now because of social media and things like that. But it's very hard work to manage these people and keep them encouraged. What they're doing is they're dedicating a year of their life, and they're working really hard. So thank you for supporting women candidates, and anybody that finds a candidate they believe in, if they can get behind them and support them, it would mean a lot to that candidate. And they just have to be prepared to know what they stand for and stick to it.
I was going to say, I do think I've been heartened in the last several years. I know we have a lot of members of our organization who, were not even very political before and have gotten motivated and actually have chose to run for office. And what I see, this is in my local community. I'm from Cincinnati. I'm sorry, Columbus, but I used to live in Columbus. I'm from Cincinnati. But I saw a lot of women in my community. We've stepped up behind our candidates. We have formed a squad behind them, like we are supporting them, because we know that these are women that we know, that we trust, who are doing this for the right reasons. And then what we're going out is we are telling all of our friends about this candidate who's amazing and is in this because she cares about what happens at the state level. So we support those candidates, we spread the word about them, because one of the most powerful things that we can do is to talk to our friends and family about the disinformation that we saw, say, on issue 1. And the reason I think, another reason that I think we were so successful at winning on that issue was because women and I work with women, so I keep saying women, but people went out and talked to their friends. They were able to tamp down that disinformation by having those really honest conversations, sending people to spots where they could get accurate information. So that, I think if you tell a candidate, we got your back, we're going to stand up and support you, and you can share that information about why this person is running, I think that does help to restore faith in that.
And we need supporting organizations like the League of Women Voters as well to help us to make sense of complex issues, and to be reliable sources of information, along with a really good, reliable press. Those are the kinds of fundamentals of democracy. So we don't only depend on the candidates to inform the public. We really need those supporting institutions to make to keep our democracy vibrant.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. A recent, Meredith, this question is probably for you. A recent set of polls showed Donald Trump leading Joe Biden in several key swing states. We all want to see our country's divisions healed. So, in the interest of accomplishing that, what do you see as the priorities for these voters who are looking for a second Trump term? What are their priorities?
To understand why people choose a candidate over another one. Donald Trump resonated with what a group of people that felt forgotten. They felt forgotten is one way to say it, and they were struggling and missing out, and he gave them a voice. I'm very impressed with the candidates that we have now. We're going to watch them tonight at the debate. We've got a lot of good choices to make, and I can't decide or make that decision of why other people choose him over another candidate. But one thing that I think that's been brought up here several times is distrust in the government. There's a lot of distrust out there. There's distrust among groups. There's distrust. A lot of people don't trust the media anymore. I know that when I ran in 2020, I tried desperately to contact every single media outlet in Columbus to say, hey, there's another person in the race too. And they just ignored me. And that went on for a year. So I think that kind of stuff has to stop. Everybody's voice needs to be heard so you can make up your own mind. So I started at WCBE, and then I went to Channel 10, and then I went to New York with 2 television stations in my career in marketing. So I'm a big fan of the media. I'd like to see them come back to giving everybody a fair shot.
Well, Wendy, it's kind of like I gave you talking points, though I didn't. I'm Jen Miller, Director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio. So I wanted to thank you for your gerrymandering comments. I think it's why we are where we are, and it also tells us where we're going, right? So when I recruit everyone, we need lots of volunteers to do signatures. But my question is this. We saw Ohioans really stand up for democracy in August. And we saw Ohioans really kind of refute a very out of touch legislature because of gerrymandering, in my opinion. So my question is, what do we expect the legislature to do? Do we expect them to double down? Or is there a possibility they're going to start to finally hear the everyday people of Ohio about the policies that need to be created?
Well, we know there's a little bit of doubling down happening already. House Speaker Jason Stevens and Senate President Matt Huffman, both said yesterday that this is not the end of the conversation on issue 1 or issue 2. And yesterday was never going to be the end of the conversation on issue 2 because that's an initiated statute. It's going to become a state law. Lawmakers can pretty easily change that, and they signaled even before the election that they were interested in modifying some parts of it. That'll go through the legislative process. Issue 1's a little bit more complicated because that's a constitutional amendment. It's a little unclear what the path forward looks like on that at this point. You had Stevens saying, there are other ways we can protect life. The legislature is going to continue prioritizing that. And then Huffman outright said, this is going to sort of open a cycle of, or I think he called it a revolving door of efforts to either repeal or replace issue 1 in the Constitution. Whether that's something he'll support or spearhead, I'm not sure, but we are already starting to see a lot of conversations about how they want to respond to last night.
And I'll just add to that, as someone who's looked at the campaign finance reports, money talks. The no side on this was supported almost exclusively by 2 organizations. My guess is they're not coming back to Ohio anytime soon. They've got possibly up to a dozen states where they're going to fight this and take the lessons from Ohio. But I don't know that they come back and help a no campaign that soon. That's just a guess, but I mean, it really was not, it wasn't a broad grassroots support in terms of the campaign finance.
I just echo, this is an expensive way to run a democracy. And so there are much more cost-efficient ways for us to deliberate. What's going to be interesting, because you talked about the national investments that were coming from particular organizations. It's going to be really interesting because Florida has been named as the next site of these conversations in terms of women's reproductive rights. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Florida, because I think that's going to be really telling in terms of what happens for turnout, what happens around what is swirling around DeSantis as well. So that's a really important one to really take a look at, as Missouri, Oklahoma, those are other states that have been named as the next kind of frontiers of these conversations. So these are ones to watch, but very expensive ways to do democracy.
Can you imagine if the money we were outspent? The last I heard was 4-1. I've heard 6-1, all from out of state values into California. I think that's the difference there. Additionally, can you imagine, that was so expensive, can you imagine if we spent that money on empowering women and children? Can you imagine if we had those millions of dollars from all of these organizations that said, we want these women to keep their children, we want to give them a means to grow, get educated, and have their families? That some kind of marketing campaign, a messaging campaign to keep two-parent households together, whatever those parents look like, just so those children have someone to raise them up and give them support. I was raised by a single mom. I know how hard it is. She had to give me to my grandparents when I started kindergarten because she worked 3 jobs. And if I didn't have that, I'd be in a really bad situation. So I wish that money was spent in better ways.
Yeah, I will say that, I mean, our August election was pretty much the Republicans advanced that issue. So to that extent, that got some outside money as well. Yeah. Next question.
Thank you. Hart Williams asks, speaking money, issue 2 passing should create extra revenue for the state of Ohio. What kinds of resources, especially concerning issue 1, and I guess the issues are associated with issue 1, what would you like to see that revenue support?
So I'll just say real quick what the revenue is designed to support right now, and then I can let others weigh in with their thoughts. So right now, that's going to go to the social equity program within the cannabis legalization law, the municipalities with dispensaries, administrative costs, and something else that I can't remember because I'm sleep deprived. Addiction recovery, yes. But that's going to be another thing. There's going to be a lot of debate within the legislature about where that money goes. I think Stevens and Huffman both want to change that. So that's my quick spiel on that.
So I'll just add, we're talking anywhere from estimates of $260 to $300 million in new revenue for the state. So we are talking about a sizable amount of money. And one of the things that was really interesting was immediately to hear the state legislature want to move away from the investments in jobs and social justice, which in the current configuration on what voters voted on last night, a component of that was to fund social justice initiatives and jobs. And so we want to be really thoughtful and really listen closely as our legislators are saying that they are going to move away from or interested in moving away from the will of the people.
Well, everyone, I wish I had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal from Doug. It goes like this. So I'm going to turn this back over to Ellen Block for some concluding remarks.
I don't know if I'll be allowed back being laid up here. Well, everyone, I hope you found today's forum informative. I know I really enjoyed hearing the insights from our panel. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, G2G Consulting, and to today's partners, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus and the Columbus Dispatch. And thank you to the Ellis for its support. We also want to thank our virtual seat patrons and the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting today's live stream. And we could not do this without all of you. Thank you. And our very special appreciation to today's panel, Haley BeMiller, Meredith Freedhoff, Wendy Smooth, Julie Womack, and Julie Carr Smyth. Thank you, ladies. Please make plans now to attend next week's forum, Conquering Lung Cancer, right here at the Ellis. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.